There are moments in life when we find ourselves standing in the cold, uncertain silence of abandonment, feeling as if the world has turned its back on us. It is in these quiet moments, when the noise of life fades away, that we begin to question everything: our purpose, our worth, and even our faith. Yet it is often in these moments of deep isolation that God's hidden work is most profound. There are moments in our lives when we are struck by an overwhelming sense of isolation. It may come suddenly, like a storm that rolls in without warning, or it may build gradually over time. The silence grows more deafening, and the distance between us and the world around us widens. In these moments of abandonment, we often find ourselves asking, why am I here? What is my purpose? Where is God in all of this? These questions linger in our minds, sometimes unanswered, as we struggle to find meaning in the darkness. But what if the very space that feels like abandonment is actually the place where God is working the most? What if the sense of isolation and loneliness that weighs so heavily upon us is, in fact, the crucible where we are being refined, where our deepest potential is being drawn out? This is the paradox that we must come to understand. It is in the moments when we feel most abandoned that we may be most deeply engaged in God's purpose for our lives. The isolation we experience is not a sign of being forgotten or forsaken, but a sacred space for growth, purpose, and divine transformation. Throughout history, many of the greatest figures who have shaped our world were not immediately recognized for their greatness. They were often abandoned, forgotten, or cast aside in their early years. Yet, it was in those very moments of obscurity and isolation that God was preparing them for something far greater than they could have imagined. From the prophet Elijah hiding in a cave to the apostle Paul enduring imprisonment, God has a long history of working in the hidden places, refining his people when the world has turned its back. These stories are not just distant historical accounts, they are timeless reminders that our moments of abandonment are often the most significant moments in God's plan for us. When we find ourselves alone, it's easy to feel as if we have been forgotten or overlooked. We look around and see others thriving in community, receiving accolades, or achieving success, while we remain in the shadows, struggling to make sense of our circumstances. It is in these moments that we are most vulnerable to discouragement and doubt. We begin to question our worth and wonder if we will ever find our place in the grand narrative of life. But it is precisely in these quiet, hidden places that God is most active. He is working in ways that we cannot always see, preparing us in ways that we may not fully understand. God does not waste our pain, our loneliness, or our isolation. Instead, he uses these moments to cultivate the depth of character, strength, and resilience that will be necessary for the work he has called us to do. It is in the darkness of our solitude that he nurtures the seeds of purpose and growth. Consider the example of the seed buried deep in the soil. It is hidden from view, surrounded by darkness, and seemingly lifeless. Yet, in that soil, something is happening. Roots are growing, strength is being built, and life is preparing to emerge. The seed is not abandoned in the earth, it is being nourished, protected, and transformed. In the same way, when we feel buried in the soil of life's challenges, we are not forgotten. We are being prepared for the breakthrough that will come in time. The process of growth, whether in nature or in our own lives, is never immediate. There are seasons of waiting, of unseen work, and of quiet transformation that often precede visible results. Just as a plant must grow its roots before it can push through the soil and reach toward the sun, we too must undergo a process of internal development before we can fully step into the calling that God has placed upon our lives. In the times when we feel abandoned or left behind, it is easy to lose sight of this process. We may think that because we cannot see immediate results, nothing is happening. But God's work is not always visible to the naked eye. His transformative work is happening beneath the surface, shaping us for the purpose he has in mind. In isolation, we are often forced to confront our own fears, doubts, and insecurities. We come face to face with the parts of ourselves that we would rather ignore: the weaknesses, the failures, the wounds that have not yet been healed. It is in these moments of vulnerability that we are most open to God's refining touch. When everything else is stripped away, when the distractions and the noise of the world are silenced, we have the opportunity to encounter God in a deeper, more intimate way. This intimacy with God, found in the quiet and in the solitude, is not something that can be rushed or manufactured. It is a slow and steady process, one that requires patience, trust, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. As we walk through seasons of abandonment, we may feel like we are wandering in the wilderness. But just as the Israelites spent 40 years in the wilderness, learning to trust and depend on God, so too are we being shaped and molded in our own times of solitude. The wilderness is not a place of punishment, it is a place of preparation. It is in the wilderness that we learn to rely on God's provision, to hear His voice more clearly, and to discover the strength that comes from walking through trials and challenges. In the wilderness, we may not see the end of the journey, and we may not fully understand the purpose of our suffering. But God is at work. He is always at work, even when we cannot see it. His hidden hand is guiding us, strengthening us, and preparing us for the purpose that He has ordained for our lives. Just as a goldsmith refines gold by subjecting it to intense heat, so too does God refine us through the heat of trials and isolation. The process is painful, but it is necessary for our growth and transformation. When we are alone, we are often confronted with the truth that our identity is not found in what others think of us or in our external circumstances. Our identity is found in God, in His love for us, and in the calling that He has placed upon our lives. In moments of abandonment, we have the opportunity to rediscover who we truly are in Christ. We are not abandoned, we are beloved. We are not forsaken, we are chosen. And it is in this truth that we find the strength to move forward, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. So when you find yourself feeling abandoned, alone, or forgotten, remember that God's hidden work is being done in you. You are not in this season by accident. You are being prepared for something greater, something more significant than you can imagine. Embrace the silence, the solitude, and the waiting, for in these moments, God is doing a deep work within you. And though the work may be hidden now, in time it will be revealed in ways that will glorify Him and fulfill the purpose He has for your life. There are seasons in life when silence becomes our companion, and solitude feels more like a weight than a gift. The world around us moves at a pace that leaves us feeling disconnected, as if we've been left behind in a forgotten corner of existence. In these moments we may yearn for the noise, the activity, the validation from others that we're seen, heard, and loved. But what if it's in the silence, in the solitude, that we find our true strength and purpose? It is easy to see silence as something negative, a void where nothing happens, a place where we are left to confront our doubts, fears, and weaknesses. In a culture that constantly demands action, progress, and visibility, the quiet moments of life seem foreign and unproductive. We fear that in silence we're being ignored or abandoned. We may ask ourselves, why is there no one here? Why is there nothing happening? Why do I feel so alone? The truth is, it is in these silent and solitary moments that we can often hear the voice of God most clearly, and it is here that we are strengthened for the journey ahead. Silence has a way of stripping away the external distractions that keep us from seeing what really matters. When everything else is taken away, we are left with only ourselves and God. In the absence of noise, we have no choice but to listen not just to the world around us, but to our inner thoughts, desires, and longings. And it is in this space that we are often able to hear the most profound truths about who we are and what we are called to do. In a world that is so loud, it is in the quiet that we may come to understand our purpose. When we enter into silence, we are often faced with discomfort. It's not easy to be alone with our thoughts and emotions, to confront the parts of ourselves that we prefer to avoid. But it is only when we sit in that discomfort that we can experience true growth. God uses silence not as a punishment, but as a tool to shape and refine us. It is in the stillness that our faith is deepened, our character is tested, and our reliance on God becomes more pronounced. The process of spiritual growth is not always loud or dramatic. Often it is quiet, slow, and unnoticeable to the outside world. Like a seed growing beneath the surface of the soil, it is in the silence that our hearts are cultivated for greater things. In these moments, we may not feel like we're accomplishing anything, but God is quietly at work, preparing us for what's to come. The stillness may feel empty, but it is actually the fertile ground where transformation happens. In times of silence, we also have the opportunity to learn how to rely fully on God. When there are no other voices speaking into our lives, we must listen to His. In the stillness, we are reminded that God is always present, even when we cannot see Him or hear Him in the way we expect. His presence is often felt most deeply in the quiet spaces, where He can speak to us without distraction. In the midst of silence, our souls find peace, and we come to understand that we are never truly alone. It is often said that God works in mysterious ways. But what if some of the most significant moments in our lives are happening in ways we cannot see or understand in the moment? The idea that God's work is hidden from our eyes can be difficult to grasp, especially in times of struggle loneliness, or confusion. When we are experiencing hardship or waiting for answers, it can feel as though God is distant, as though we have been left to navigate life's challenges on our own. But in reality, it is during these very moments that God is often at work most powerfully, working behind the scenes in ways that we cannot yet comprehend. His work is not always immediately visible, but it is always present, always shaping, always guiding us toward the purpose he has set for us. It is human nature to want immediate results, to see the fruit of our efforts right away, especially when we are in difficult circumstances. We want to know that the struggles we face have meaning, that our pain is not in vain, and that there is some greater purpose behind the hardship. Yet in the moments when we feel most abandoned, when we are surrounded by silence and uncertainty, it can seem as though nothing is happening. The lack of visible progress or outward signs of success leads us to doubt that God is even present in our situation, let alone working for our good. But God's work is not confined to what we can see or understand at the moment. God's hidden work is a theme woven throughout Scripture, and it is something we are called to trust even when we cannot fully see it. The Bible is filled with examples of God working in unseen ways, preparing his people for what is yet to come, even when they are unaware of his presence. Take, for example, the story of Joseph. Joseph's life was marked by betrayal, imprisonment, and hardship. He was sold into slavery by his own brothers, and for years he lived in obscurity, far from his family and the life he had once known. From the outside, it appeared as though Joseph had been abandoned by God, and there were times when Joseph himself must have questioned whether he would ever see the fulfillment of the dreams he had been given in his youth. But even in the midst of his trials, God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating the events of Joseph's life in ways that he could not yet understand. The trials he faced, the rejection, the isolation, and the suffering were all part of God's hidden work, shaping Joseph into the leader he was destined to become. Similarly, in the New Testament, we see how God worked in hidden ways through the life of Jesus. While many of the miracles and teachings of Jesus were visible to those around him, much of his work was done quietly, in private moments or in the hearts of those who followed him. Jesus did not come to earth in the way many expected, with power and might, but rather in humility, and he often worked in ways that were not immediately recognized by those around him. In his death and resurrection, God's hidden work was revealed in its fullness, showing that even when it appeared that Jesus had been defeated, God was working in the most profound and redemptive way possible. Just as God's work in Joseph's life and in the life of Jesus was often hidden, so too is God's work in our own lives often invisible to the human eye. In times of difficulty, when we feel abandoned or alone, we may not see how God is using our circumstances to shape us or prepare us for the future. But that does not mean that he is absent or inactive. His presence is constant, even in the silence, and his hand is always at work, even when we cannot perceive it. God's work often happens beneath the surface, in the quiet moments when we are not aware of his influence. Just as the roots of a tree grow deep into the ground, unseen by the eye, God is at work deep within us, shaping our character, strengthening our faith, and preparing us for the purpose he has for our lives. There are many reasons why God's work may be hidden from us in a particular season. Sometimes he allows us to go through periods of difficulty and struggle so that we will learn to trust him more deeply. It is in these times of uncertainty that we are often forced to rely on God, to lean into him in a way that we might not do in times of ease and comfort. In the hiddenness of our circumstances, we learn the value of patience, of trusting in God's timing, and of recognizing that his ways are higher than our own. When we are in the midst of struggle, we often cannot see the bigger picture, but God sees everything. He knows the end from the beginning, and he is using every moment of our lives, including the difficult ones, to bring about his ultimate plan. Other times, God's hidden work is simply part of his process of preparation. Just as a craftsman works on a piece of wood or metal, shaping and refining it over time, God is working on us, molding us into the people he has called us to be. This process of shaping and refining is not always visible to others, and it can be painful at times. But it is necessary for our growth, and it is an essential part of the journey toward fulfilling the purpose God has set before us. The times when we feel most alone or abandoned are often the times when God is doing his most important work in our lives, preparing us for the greater things that lie ahead. Even though we may not see it, God is always at work. His work is not limited to the visible, the immediate, or the understood. It is in the unseen places, in the quiet moments, and in the midst of our challenges that he is often doing his most profound work. His hidden work is not a sign of his absence, but a testament to his faithfulness. Even when we cannot see what he is doing, we can trust that he is working for our good, shaping us for the future he has in store. The challenge for us is to trust in God's hidden work, even when we cannot see the evidence of it. To believe that, even in the silence, God is present and at work. This requires faith, patience, and a willingness to surrender to his timing. It requires letting go of the need to control our circumstances and trusting that God knows what is best for us. We may not always understand the reasons behind our struggles or the timing of God's actions, but we can rest assured that his work is always purposeful, always meaningful, and always moving us closer to the fulfillment of his plan. In the hiddenness of our lives, God is at work, preparing us for something greater than we can imagine. And in time, the hidden work of God will be revealed, and we will see how every moment of our lives has been part of his divine design. When we find ourselves in a place of isolation, when it feels as though the world has forgotten us, and we are standing alone, it can be easy to see that as a sign of defeat. We may look around and see others flourishing, surrounded by support and success, while we seem to be trapped in a desert, far from the life we once knew or hoped for. But the truth is that isolation is not a punishment, nor is it a sign that we are being overlooked by God. Rather, it is often in these very moments that we are being prepared for a breakthrough, a new season of growth and resilience. The wilderness is a place where we are stripped of distractions, where the external noise of life quiets, and where we are forced to confront the deep, hidden parts of ourselves. In these times, we cannot rely on the things that once gave us comfort or security. We may be forced to face our fears, doubts, and weaknesses in a way that we never have before. But in the process, we are learning to rely on something greater than ourselves. We are learning to depend on God and trust that he is with us, even when it feels like we are walking alone. Resilience does not come from a life of ease and comfort. It is born out of hardship, out of struggle, and out of moments when we feel as though we have reached our limits. It is in the wilderness, in the moments of loneliness and challenge, that we discover the true depths of our strength. In these times, we realize that we are capable of far more than we thought, and we begin to tap into a reservoir of perseverance that we didn't even know existed within us. The very struggles that seem to hold us back are the ones that strengthen us, teaching us how to press forward, even when the road ahead is unclear. In isolation, we often learn the lessons we would never have learned in the midst of comfort. We discover who we truly are when we are stripped of everything else. We find our true identity not in our accomplishments, possessions, or relationships, but in our relationship with God. It is in the wilderness that we realize we are not defined by what we have or what we do, but by who we are in him. And in that realization, we begin to understand that our worth is not dependent on the approval of others or on the success we achieve. Our worth is rooted in God's love for us, which never changes, no matter where we find ourselves in life. The wilderness can be a lonely place, but it is also a place of profound growth. It is where we are refined and shaped, where our character is developed and our faith is deepened. The challenges we face in isolation do not diminish us. They make us stronger, more resilient, and more prepared for the future God has for us. It is in the wilderness that we begin to see that our circumstances are not the defining factor of our lives. What truly matters is how we respond to those circumstances, how we choose to trust God and remain faithful even when the path is unclear. When we emerge from the wilderness, we are different. We are more resilient, more grounded in our faith, and more aware of the strength that God has given us. The isolation that once seemed like a burden has now become the very thing that has prepared us for the future, equipping us to face whatever challenges may come our way. And when we look back, we will see that the wilderness was not a place of abandonment, but a place of preparation for something far greater than we could imagine.